Welcome everybody to an evening of poetry. I'm so excited you are all here. The Wellfleet Public Library has a long history of hosting poetry nights, of doing things with poetry. We just published our first poetry zine, our first literary zine. We're calling it a quarantine. If you could see it up on our website, on the homepage under quarantine, you could take a look at it. We're really excited, and we'll be doing another issue of it in the fall, and we'll let you all know so you could submit to it. My name is Jennifer Wertkin, and I'm the director of the Wellfleet Library, and I will be here for all of your Zoom-related needs. Right now, you are all muted. At the end, there will be time for a Q&A. But our host for this evening is John Bonanni. So let me just very quickly introduce him, and we will get going with our poetry reading. John is the founding editor of the Cape Cod Poetry Review. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Cortland Review, North American Review, Florida Review, and Prairie Schooner, among others. So without further ado, I will hand it over to John, and John, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you everybody for coming. The gestation of this reading was planned almost, I want to say close to a year ago. Maybe Martha can correct me on that. But we did plan on having this like at the Wellfleet Library, and it was going to be within a venue space. So it's really beautiful that Jen had reached out and kind of asked if we could continue it in the ether, which I'm really happy about because it's a needed reading, especially right now. I have the pleasure of introducing Martha, so I'm just gonna read from her bio, but also kind of just talk about how great she is. So first we're gonna hear from Martha Collins, and then after that we'll hear from Sharon Dunn, and then like Jen had mentioned, there will be a Q&A to follow. Martha Collins has published 10 books of poetry, most recently Because What Else Could I Do, and 4 volumes of co-translated Vietnamese poetry. Collins also founded the Creative Writing Program at UMass Boston and served as Pauline Delaney Professor of Creative Writing at Oberlin College for 10 years. She currently lives in Cambridge, but we are trying to recruit her to the Cape, maybe one day. I want to say that Martha has always been an incredible inspiration for me. I've taken two classes with her at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and they have just been phenomenal. So if you ever get a chance to study with her, please take advantage of that. She is the most generous teacher I've ever had in my life. She's also an inspiration, and she's been a mentor to me. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Martha take it over.
Thanks so much, John. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you in advance, Sharon Dunn. It's a great pleasure to read with my dear friend, Sharon. And thank you all for being here. I'm going to begin by reading 2 recent poems which address directly and indirectly a couple of aspects of our current situation and lives. The first one was written during the early months of the pandemic. It's a fairly light poem, written at a time when human communication wasn't happening much among neighbors. It's in 12 very short parts. Talking to my neighbors, April, May 2020. Hey, you red tulip, anthers turned, pistol plumped. Good job. Lucky dogs who get to take your humans for longer walks. Deep purple iris, not quite open, but I know what's inside. Woo woo. Sorry, weeds, but you'll succeed in spite of me. So green, so fast, so many greens. Sycamore, it's time. Ants, you're not safe in here. Cardinal, thanks for the wolf whistle, the red suit, for letting me come so close. Azalea crowds of pink, scarlet, white, no distancing for you. Squirrel chases, pigeon chases, rabbit chases, squirrel, pigeon, rabbit. Got my attention, tulip tree, yellow, orange, green flowers plopping on pavement. Slow down, cars. Squirrel imprinted on street, crushed dove. Wind, you're everywhere. No wonder we say breath of God. No wonder. I'm still looking at you, John. Is that what everyone's doing here? Anyway.
I don't think so. It should be on speaker view. I think it depends on the view.
All right, the second poem, less happily, provides some history for the kind of racism that has come to the fore this spring. Some years ago, the late Jake Adam York embarked on a project of visiting all of the sites of those people who were killed during and often participating in the civil rights movement. After Jake died, the also late, now late, John Tribble invited any and all poets to visit the sites that Jake hadn't visited and write poems about them and to attempt to finish that project. So this poem was written during and after I visited Philadelphia, Mississippi in 2018, I think, and it goes back to an event in 1959. Rehearsal. Philadelphia, Mississippi, Luther Jackson, 1932 to 1959. A block from the county courthouse with the Confederate Soldier Memorial, past the jail where the civil rights workers were held while the Klan assembled in '64. Down Bird to Oak, to Water, to Pine, past Magnolias into sweet gum catalpas, into this dead-end cave of trees where he parked one night with the girl and passed out, and Officer Rainey found them and ordered him out of the car and pushed him out of sight of the girl, who heard 2 shots and heard Rainey say, "Come down, I think I have killed a..." And then the coroner's jury said justifiable homicide, and Medgar Evers requested an investigation. But the Justice Department said no violation. And 5 years later, they accused Rainey and 20 others of conspiring to kill the civil rights workers. But 3 years later, Rainey himself was acquitted. And 50 years later, the FBI reopened the Jackson case, but found no police, no county records, just newspaper files and relative stories. And anyway, Rainey was dead. Of course, I couldn't have been that girl, but if I'd been the white girl I was and lived here and read the papers, would I have questioned justifiable? And if I'd been here 5 years later and read about the civil rights workers, and decades later when Michael, Eric, Tamir, Philando, and all the others, can I imagine myself in that car at the end of this dead-end street where a man was ordered out of the car and the girl who was with him, who was not me, cried, "You have killed him for nothing." And now I'd like to turn to my most recent book, Because What Else Could I Do?, which is a sequence of untitled poems I addressed to my husband, Ted, following his sudden death in September 2016. We spent many summers in Wellfleet, or parts of them, the last time just a month before he died. I'm going to read 12 of these poems, and I should note that Ted and I commuted between Cambridge and Hartford for all of our married life. I'll just pause between these untitled poems. I alone in a restaurant, and what is left of you at home, in a plastic box on your dresser where you kept your socks and put your change. And what will I do at home in my own house? What will I do with my one spoon and my wide bed? What will I do without? In the dream, we are standing together in your kitchen. We have just finished the dishes. You are wearing your blue shirt with the white stripes. I have my arm across your shoulders and I am saying, I am so glad. And then my hand, so glad we could save you. I have to tell you, I'm sleeping with a snowy owl, a kid's puppet my friend sent me. It has a stick so you can turn the head all the way around the way owls do. But I can't feel the stick. Her wings wrap part way around me and comfort me. I know she is a she because she has black spots. And I should also mention the photograph taken by another friend who gave it to me. It's sitting on my desk beside some pictures of you. It's a snowy owl and she is flying toward you. Your last commute, I drove you in your car, played Handel all the way, walked you up my stairs. This last weekend, we will be together. Ashes on my dresser now. I tried to put them beside my bed, but what could I do with a plastic box in a thick paper bag? So I put the armadillo I bought you on top of the box with the little gray goose I bought you because you loved the song, The Old Gray Goose Is. Hello over there with the armadillo and little gray goose. You'd always say hello there or just hello when we met on weekends, and sometimes after we'd settled into the bed, and sometimes just after we'd. Love, this is almost our last night together, the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature is stirring but me. The next 4 poems were written while I was in Wellfleet in the last part of December when we came down here, his children and I, to scatter his ashes off the beaches that we had loved so much. The first one of these 4 poems takes place at Long Pond, where we used to swim. The winding road, the bare trees. Through bare trees, the gray pond. Beside the pond, the bench where you sat. The empty bench, the still pond. Across the pond, the 2 white chairs. The chairs reflected where I would swim. And when I'd swum almost back in, you get in the water and meet me there. This is LeCant Hollow Beach. Paper bag with empty box with almost empty plastic bag, and on my hands and on my jeans, you, some part or parts of you from when we sent you into the sea, low tide, so you easily rode the lightest currents in tiny explosions of white. And when we finished, a sudden late sun on the water, of which you were becoming a part, on runnels between patches of sand, as if you were signing yourself in silver. In the dream, we disagreed. You've ordered twice as much fish as we need, and when I've complained, you've walked out of the store and left the fish, and I've walked out behind you and into the night in the little beige heels I wore in the picture I sent before we met. And you've gone to the car, but I haven't followed. I'm walking home, and home is miles away in this town, which isn't your town or mine. And now it is dark, and there are no cars, no lights, and I am very afraid. I think I should not be walking alone and not in these shoes, but I am alone, and home is twice as far from here as I ever thought it would be. This is Newcomb Hollow. Another beach, the last one we walked together, hand in hand in the August sun. And I walked on while you rested there, and now it is winter, and I am here with almost the last of you in my hand, a tiny part of some parts of you, your hand, your blue eye, shoulder, mouth. And I try to gentle you in to the sea, but a sudden wave rushes over my feet, and the wind catches this part of some parts of you. And instead you are in the air, and more than before, you are on me. You have met me again. You will not let me let you go. You are in the sea where you wanted to be, but you are also in air and sand and earth where your grandson will bury another small part. And now I lick my finger, and you are in me. And with you went my summer son, a friend or two, and who was there. And with you went the weeks to come, the months so far, my one, my body too, the one I knew as one of two, though you forgot to take desire, which now is wrapped in grief's long arms. And with you went the one I was, that was within, without, with you, mostly brave and largely true. The one I find some moments in some darkened place of joy, then lose. Two more. In your rust-colored jacket, your blue striped shirt, on your skis in the woods, on the beach, in the surf, your house in winter, in spring, in your office chair, in the yard with your kids, in California, in Florence, in Rome, your lilacs before they broke in the storm, your face, all over now. This last poem actually happened. There are some quotes in it that I'll indicate, which come from a very short poem that I wrote several months before my husband died. On the evening of the 6th-month day, I drove into the hills, a river town, a little cafe to read my poems to strangers and friends. And at the end I read, "Go with me into that night where one will go before. Red moon by night, red night, night, my love, by and by." And there was silence because they told me after, when I read, "Go," the door opened and no one was there. And when I read, "Bye," the door closed. Thank you.
Wow, just breathless. You always make me breathless, Martha. I'm posting a link to University of Pittsburgh Press, which is how to purchase this book because it's just incredible. Up next, we have Sharon Dunn. Sharon is going to read from her manuscript, An Island in Time. This is about Wellfleet's Bound Brook Island, where she has lived each summer for over 25 years. Enclosed entirely within the National Seashore, this 1 square mile of land, An Island No More, has a quiet beauty and a rich history. Sharon has published a memoir, Under a Dark Eye, a family story, and 2 books of poetry, Refugees in the Garden and My Brother and I. Please welcome Sharon.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, John, for that introduction. And thank you, Martha, for the most moving reading. To hear you read those poems is inexpressibly beautiful for me. Jennifer, thank you for welcoming us to the library again. It's wonderful to be here. This spring, I finished a book that I've been working on for about 4 years that's about Bound Brook Island, as John said. And it's a hybrid book again. It is memoir, history. It has maps, old historical photographs and contemporary photographs, and poems. And it's all about Bound Brook Island, where my family spends the summers. Bound Brook Island is located in northwest Wellfleet. Its western flank is on Cape Cod Bay. Somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, Sharon, I didn't know you lived on an island." And this is a place that once was an island, but is an island no more. Once it had on its northern side, Little Bound Brook, which was a tidal inlet and connected up to the bay. And it also had the Herring River, and which then was very fulsome and very deep. And it had a robust harbor where boats could go in and out from the bay and could also reach the Atlantic. This made it a perfect maritime location, and that is why people settled here very early on in Wellfleet's history. My first true excitement was actually finding the maps that showed me that this was truly an island at one time, and these were maps from the 1700s. The easy access meant that by 1850, about 150 people lived here in about 26 houses, and but over time, both Bound Brook and Duck Harbor silted up, and families, one after another, began to leave. By the early 1900s, this was a depopulated island. Nobody was living here anymore. So this absolutely fascinated me when I started to learn this history. At the end of the second decade of the 20th century, a new group of people started coming to Bound Brook Island, and they were not Cape Codders. They were people who came here to occupy the antique houses, to maybe start a different kind of life, or to come for summers. So what I find is that this is a very beautiful, quiet place. You cannot hear the traffic from Route 6. There's no store, there's no cell service. There's one road that leads onto the island. It is a sand road with a grassy median in the middle. And only one car at a time can come down the road. So this is, the first poem that I'm gonna read is about that island road. Island road. Moccasins and bare feet tamped a path. Then settlers' carts widened the trail. Down what is now a sandy road, grass growing in the middle, a car drives slowly, scratched by arcs of thorny rose, beach plum, scrub oak. Up the road so narrow, a newcomer wonders, is a car allowed? This quiet morning, the tawny sand is pressed with paw prints, footprints, zigzag tire treads, tracks of mouse, rabbit, deer. Here, a half mile from the bay, lavender oyster shells and thick shards of ancient clamshell emerge from the sand. A walker's piled shells and chunks of brick atop the grassy road bank, a cache of the past, chimney brick from a house moved off island long ago. The road, mottled gold in sun, purple in shade, descends, follows the curve of a ghost estuary on its way west to the bay. I became fascinated by Bound Brook's topography, by its landscape, and by its history. The landscape was full of ravines, high ridges, ups and downs when I went hiking that wore me out. And I wondered, how did this land get formed? And I spent a lot of time taking a look at the geology of the island, finding out that it was formed during the last ice age, and that Bound Brook itself was really where the seam of two huge lobes of ice were pressing together. And that and some tremendous water forces for the melting of the glaciers created the topography that's here today. I still really love wandering around the island and kind of experiencing in my body what the landscape feels like. The first people that lived here were the Pono Nakanits. They were a tribe, part of the Nauset peoples, who and the Wampanoags, who were in this part of the world on Cape Cod. There was an archaeological dig at one of the houses here on Wellfleet, on Bound Brook, at what's now called the Baker Biddle House, and there were artifacts from the Native Americans, discovered all kinds of flint stones and arrowheads that go back thousands and thousands of years. These Indian remains are everywhere on this island, I'm sure. I'd like to imagine a Native American who's lived on into our time and who has seen everything that's happened on Bound Brook. And this poem is called The Old One. For hundreds of years, he has lived here near the brook he calls Sapokanisk. Once he fished herring with a weir, hunted deer in the tall woods. His woman grew corn on the hillside. He watched the new ones fell trees, build homes, and make fire inside. He saw the slaughter of blackfish, fat boiled in big pots on the beach. He saw flocks of sheep, herds of cattle, eating every tip of green, then winds blowing away the soil. He saw a cross twirling on a hill, and along the creek, vats drying salt water, leaving white crystals. He has seen it all, how his people died of disease, how the harbor silted up, how the river grew dank, no longer cleansed by the tides. He saw a gleaming rail laid and a huge beast smoking, roaring over the land. Then the beast left and grasses covered its path. He keeps walking the old trails up and over large crenellations of the Ice Age, over heather and bearberry, mosses of every green, staying behind the oaks grown tall again. In the old places, he digs arrowheads and rubs them. Atop a stone once, he left one for me. The earliest settlers on Bound Brook Island arrived about 1730, and they settled on sites that were originally cleared and lived on by the native peoples. The native peoples had figured out all the best places, and the settlers, the colonists, knew that, and that's where they sited their houses. There were so many things that I found fascinating in the history of Bound Brook. How there was shore whaling, where pilot whales were driven to shore by boats and harvested for their oil. And the pilot whales back in the 17 and 1800s were so numerous at times in the bay. I can just try to imagine what it would be like today if that kind of life were living there and coming in and beaching themselves sometimes on shore. In my book, I draw several portraits of individuals that caught my attention. Reuben Rich, who built the first schooner in Wellfleet, built it right off where the Atwood Higgins house is on the Herring River. It was built in 1800. It was called the Freemason. Another man that I talk about, I have a whole chapter on, is Lorenzo Dow Baker, who was the most famous son of Wellfleet. He was born on Bound Brook Island. He founded what eventually became the United Fruit Company, and he was the one who brought the banana trade from Jamaica up to the United States. For me, one of the most exciting things in my book was that and it was for me a real breakthrough, is that I found an 1848 US Coastal Survey map of Bound Brook Island that showed every single house, every orchard, all the fences, where the salt works were, where the elevations were. And at the same time, the 1850 census at the same time period was the very first census that listed every family with every member of the family, rather than just tick marks, which the US Census had prior to this. So I was able finally to take a look at all the inhabitants in 1850, and I was so excited to be able to see what the family relations were, and I found out that there were only 2 families that constituted everyone on the island. They were all members of the Atwood family or the Rich family, or intermarriages of those people. I discovered a dramatic story of a young outlier family, not a Rich or an Atwood, the Popes, African Americans who landed on the island in 1850 and lived there. That became a really interesting story. I wonder how many people know that there was a huge herring fishery at the end of the island. It was 3 huge buildings, and not so huge, but 3 buildings where the herring run was salted and caught and salted and put in barrels for the train to pick them up and bring them to Boston and beyond. I also talk about the Herring River and how it was diked in 1909, turning a very vibrant riverway and estuary into a much depleted area, and which had an effect on Bound Brook in terms of the herring run. And in the 20th century, finally, there was the construction of 2 iconic modern houses. These and many more aspects of the island history really intrigued me. I'd like to read now just from the epilogue of my book and a final poem for you. So this is what I wrote. I am not a geologist, an anthropologist, or historian. I am simply someone who fell in love with a place and asked all sorts of questions about it. How was its unique landscape formed? Why were there virtually no vegetation in photos from the early 20th century, given that old growth forests covered the land to the edge of the sea when the Pilgrims had arrived? Who lived here? How did they live and why did they leave? So I have spent years happily hunting down town records and deeds and wills and censuses and investigating cellar holes where the houses used to be to tell the story that I put together. And I came across a sentence that Peter McMahon and Christine Cipriani wrote about Jack Hall in their book, Cape Cod Modern. My beloved neighbor, Jack, a New Yorker who settled here in 1936, took me hiking all over Bound Brook in the 1990s. This is what they wrote. The idea of Bound Brook Island as a rural paradise. And yes, that is what I apprehended when we first drove onto the island down the sandy road, when I saw for the first time the weathered three-quarter cape, house through the wild hedge, the house that eventually would be in our care. The house was like a dream, like an image in a miniature diorama, a kind of rustic perfection. And so too the island turned out to be as we arrived for summer after summer. While I have discovered much about this place, it still holds secrets. The ecstatic 3-day Methodist camp meetings attended by hundreds arriving by boat from all over the Cape and from Boston. Where were the tents pitched near the preaching platform for these gatherings under the full moon of August in the years 1823, 24, and 25? We don't know where those meetings were held on the island. Where was the Thomas Hopkins homestead located before it was flaked and moved to Baker Avenue in Wellfleet? Who was the last seaman to negotiate his boat home from the bay into Duck Harbor before it was sealed forever with silt and dunes? What brought mariner Charles Pope and his wife Sarah in their 20s here in 1850, the only African-American couple on the Lower Cape? This final poem that I'm going to read is dedicated to all the mariners and their families on Bound Brook Island and in Wellfleet and on the Cape. It's called Lament. One in 5 who called Wellfleet home sailed the oceans, whaling, then fishing for cod, then mackerel. Captains, cooks, mates, cabin boys, few knew how to swim. In one Bound Brook Island family, all 5 males were persons employed in navigation of the ocean. The narrow columns of the 1840 census tell me 1 10 to 14, 1 15 to 19, 2 20 to 29, 1 50 to 59. No family was unscathed by loss. Cousin, uncle, brother, father, husband, son. I stand on a hill overlooking the sea. Was it here a man missing 2 sons scanned the horizon with his glass? Did their mother pack him lunch? Did he stay each day till the sun set? How many weeks or months before he lay the scope above the hearth on the mantle for good? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you both. Wow. That's just stunning. Stunning how much talent we have here. Both of those just readings left me breathless for different reasons. And Martha, I did read your collection a while ago, and I am going to go back and read it again. It's just so beautiful. And Sharon, I cannot wait to get my hands on your book. I had no idea this was going on. I'm so excited. I'm going to take questions now, and the way they're, in my view, there are a couple of pages, and it is much easier for me to take questions if you are able to raise your hand in the Zoom platform, which means if you're on any kind of computer, if you go to the bottom of the page where it says participants and you click on it, there's a pop-up comes up with a list of the participants, and one of your options on the bottom is raise hand. If you're on a device like an iPad, if you touch the screen, there's an option there to raise your hand, and that is much easier for me to see than to kind of scroll through and see if people are actually raising their hand, though I will do that to try to get to you if you're more technologically unfamiliar with this platform. So, does anyone have any questions for either of our speakers? Well, I do. Sharon, how long have you been working on this project?
I've been working on this project for about 4 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea. It's great. It's great.
How to do this.
Susan, do you have a question?
No, I just want to thank them both so much. It was wonderful. I don't have a question. I feel moved and pleased, and I hate Zoom, and this is the most rewarding Zoom that I've participated in. And so I'm really grateful. So that's all I have to say, really. And Roswell feels the same, I think.
You think?
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
I think Sheila, you need to unmute yourself.
We would just lean forward.
There you go.
I just want to thank both participants. They were wonderful, but I have a question for Sharon. Where did you find all this information, the maps and everything that you said?
Well, you know, one map I got from the Boston Public Library. Most everything is online. So I was able to get a wonderful maps from the 1700s from like the Boston Public Library. The map that most excited me, I found by going to the Cape Cod National Seashore historian, Bill Burke, and he knew of this huge map of the Cape that had been done in 1848 by a young cartographer, and that was the one that really revealed everything to me. So it's by kind of exploring around and finding things.
And are there any descendants left from those three families that you know of?
So there certainly is. I have a friend who, Joan Hopkins Coughlin, who is stays in Wellfleet every summer, and she has an art gallery with her husband. And I'm sure that there are Atwoods around. I don't know any, but there's at least one person that I know who's a descendant of somebody from the island.
So interesting. Thank you.
Cheryl, I think you are next. Cheryl? Jaffe? You can unmute yourself.
Hi. I just want to thank everybody for this amazing talk. And I want to know where to find these books. Where can I purchase the book of poetry and and Sharon Dunn's book?
Well, Sharon has not published her book yet. It's a work in progress. So it's forthcoming. Martha's book,
yes.
John put a link in the chat to the press that you can get it from. We also have a copy in the library, but you should really have your own.
It's also available by order from Porter Square Books in Cambridge or the Grolier Poetry Shop in Cambridge, and of course on Amazon. And Sharon has other books which are available. Where, Sharon?
Well, my memoir is on Amazon. It's called Under a Dark Eye, A Family Story.
And it's phenomenal.
It is, and it's another hybrid, and a lot of research and a lot of lovely poetry too.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it. Jerry, I see you've been waving your hand.
Both hands if you want. I thank you both. It's been a wonderful hour. But I have a question for Sharon. I think I have read that there is a project underway, or at least it may be on paper, maybe real, to restore the Herring River. In what way, if you know anything about it, will that affect Bound Island?
Yes, there is the Herring River Restoration Project, which involves many, many thousands of dollars. It has been approved. It's getting grants from the state and from the federal government. It's a plan to take that dike and replace it with a whole new structure and gradually increase the flow of water into the estuary. I've seen plans that show that in a 100-year storm, once this the restoration is accomplished, that water may come up to very close to where my house is, because there would be so much water. If it was a 100-year storm, it would be coming up within probably 500 feet of my house, which at one time, formerly, it did. So.
Will the island be recreated?
Does that answer your question, Mary? Pardon
Will
me?
that somehow recreate the island?
Everyone.
No, that will not create. No, because it was Duck Harbor. I'm sorry that I can't show you a map. I just don't have that facility right now. But it was the harbor that made for the livelihood of all the mariners here, and that has silted up for good. That will not ever open up again. Okay.
Thank you.
Carl, you're next.
I'm muted. Hello. First of all, thank you both for beautiful readings. And this is all the way from St. Louis. It's a very nice distraction from the storms and things here in St. Louis. But Martha, I wanted to ask you a question, because before this most recent book, it has seemed as if, I don't know if you would call yourself a docu-poet, but in some ways, they've been very much documenting history of race in this country, sort of a trilogy, the way I saw it. And then as I was listening, I was thinking, and as I was reading earlier in the year, because what else could I do? It seems very different at first, obviously much more intimate and personal, but it occurs to me that intimate lyric poetry also maybe is a way of documentary. It's a form of document. And anyway, I guess I wondered how because you usually seem to work with lots of research and all of that, and how was that shift to this? Although I doubt it was very conscious at the moment, but do you see relatedness between this most recent book and the work you've been doing in the last, say, I don't know, 10 years?
Yeah, I didn't start out as a documentary poet, but the material of those three books, focusing on race, was just so compelling. I could not help but write them. when I discovered that my father had actually witnessed a lynching, I could not forget about that. And I didn't choose to write about that. It chose me. So in that sense, because What Else Could I Do also chose me. When my husband died, it was a quite shocking and very sudden death. And I didn't even intend to publish these poems. I had no intention of doing so. But at some point it became clear as other people read the book that it was probably something for me to share. The process, I guess it's the compulsion to write that is one thing that these things have in common. I should also say that this isn't the only thing I did while I was writing the documentary books. I was writing a couple of other books called Day Unto Day and Night Unto Night, and it was the same thing. When I'd been doing the documentary work, which always had some personal connection to me, I'd forgotten how to write short poems, and my life suddenly became something so compelling I had to write about it. My husband was having surgery, my mother died. So in the middle of writing that trilogy of books about race, I was also doing what I had to do. And I don't see it, I don't feel it as terribly different. You're right, the lyric is as compulsive as the other. And I also don't see the documentary work as totally absent of the lyric, or I wouldn't be interested in it. So thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Laura.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is not really a question. Well, first of all, thank you both. You know, those are just such beautiful readings and really love being here for that. But I also just wanted to say about Sharon's writing that what I think is so amazing and such a connection between both books, the Under a Dark Eye and this new one that she's working on, is this amazing kind of detective work that she does. It's like this learning about something through exploration and literal detective work. She's like a researcher into the past, and she can find things from this tiniest little insignificant moments, whether it's an old photograph or a map, and then bring that out and then turn it in, like tell a story that comes from this just little tiny little detail, and learn so much about the story from that. It's kind of amazing. So it's such a unique way of being a writer and telling a story, and I love it.
So do I. That's why I was so excited there was a new one coming. Ellen.
Hi, it's Jim and Ellen here from across the water in Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. And I just want to say we enjoyed both of these enormously. And Sharon, a sort of question, because you spend a good portion of your year there in one kind of life that you've chronicled in this book. And then you spend the rest of the year in a very different kind of life, just in terms of the people around you, the level of, of technology, the level of population. What's the contrast like year to year? I mean, but in portions of the year. And not counting me, or maybe counting this one, which is a really weird year.
Well, Jim, I've actually never thought of that. Wherever I am, I'm like completely there. When I'm here, I don't give any thought to Leverett, Massachusetts and Western Massachusetts. It is out of my mind. And when I'm there, I don't think about Cape Cod at all. So I don't compare or contrast, and I've kind of like never really done that. So that just happens to be the way I am. I find both locations to be so rich and so nourishing to me, both of them. So.
Well, that's good. That's good. It struck me that they're very different kinds of places.
They are, yeah.
Charles Hartman.
Yeah, I think that's a very, thank you both, Sharon and Martha, for these wonderful and apparently quite different writings, which as in a way Carl was pointing out, are on some level not that different. I mean, both of you are writers who define writing as curiosity. And I'm just curious whether the two of you have talked about your writing, these writings together in those terms.
Sharon or me?
Yes.
Oh, I'll go ahead then. Sharon and I have shared poems back and forth for many years. And so she had read the manuscript of Because What Else Could I Do? And I have been reading the Bound Brook poems for some time. Sharon, I think I've been reading Bound Brook Island poems longer than 4 years. So I don't think we've ever talked about the process so much, but as Carl mentioned, I've done a great deal of research myself. So we do have that in common as well. And I think we've talked about doing that and the process and all of that. So, so yeah, it's a real writerly friendship.
Yes, I guess Martha's done so much research for her as what someone called docu poetry, and that really calls to me. I really speaks to me, and Martha's right. The Bound Brook poems started maybe 25 years ago, and I wrote poem after poem after poem, and it was only about 4 years ago that I thought, I don't really want to publish a book of poems about Bound Brook. I want to write a book about Bound Brook. And so that's what I've done.
Is there anyone else that might be raising their hand without using the Zoom format that I'm not seeing?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Just both of you, like, talking about, like, as we move into the docu-poetic kind of conversation, do you find sometimes that you can over-research a topic as you're curious about it? Or like sometimes, like, because I've written things that kind of coordinate with that whole idea of like, you're going into something, but then sometimes, like, I find that I just become too obsessed with it. And then I almost lose the curiosity behind the poem. Have you ever found that?
Sharon? I can answer something. It's kind of paradoxical. On the one hand, doing too much research. There's a person in this audience who wondered while I was writing my first documentary book whether I was doing too much research. And I had to think about that. And what I realized is that when one is writing more personal lyrics, as in the book I read from tonight, your head is full of stuff. You've got so much to draw upon. But when you're writing about something you don't know anything about, you have to put a lot more in there than you can possibly ever get out. So that there's really, on the one hand, never, to my mind, too much. On the other hand, I have also found that it's very useful to start writing before I know everything. I'm a firm believer in writing stupid. If I know everything I have to say, there's no point in writing a poem. So I'll often stumble along with just a little that I have, and of course, sometimes I have to correct. So it's balancing those two things of having too much and not having enough, and somehow both of those things contributing for me.
And for me, it's really not my poems that have a lot of documentary material. It's really the prose integument between the poems, I think. So the question doesn't really quite apply. I do have to have my radar up. Sometimes with my prose, I get enamored of something and I realize if I read it again, I'm bored by it. And even as much as all the research I put into it, I cut it out. So that's happened frequently.
Anybody else? Before we say goodnight to a wonderful, wonderful evening. Well, thank you, Martha and Sharon and John, for coming to the library where we usually meet in our big meeting room, but tonight we are meeting in our different format meeting room. And as I always say, the silver lining, as I always say lately, the silver lining of this is that we get to bring together our friends from all over the country or from Martha's Vineyard who would not have come otherwise. And we get to be together in poetry and prose and literature. And I'm so glad you could all make it. This is being recorded. It will be up on our YouTube station soon. And please feel free to share it with your family and friends, and look for more poetry and literature from us at the library. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.